how busy you are in 3, 4 disciplines. And so, how are you today?
Very well, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me here, and it's really a great honor. Yeah, so you want me to talk about myself, is it?
Yeah. I think, of course, this is not a formal, and therefore you decide the priorities.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it is so interesting for us to know, given that you come from so many cultures, you were born in Korea, you professionally studied music and perform as a pianist. You have a big tradition in the musical world, also with your in-law family, and you are immersed completely. To tell us a little bit, as you also lived in so many countries, at least Denmark, UK, Switzerland, I don't know them all, to tell us a few things in the order that you desire, how the education in Korea influenced your discipline or your preferences, how the different countries where you lived showed their attitude in the professional music world towards high standards women performers. How did you decide from all sciences to choose neuroscience? And how do you want to combine the two? You take the sequence, you junk what you don't want to say, you add what you wish to say. It's really up to you. Really informal.
Oh, there are so many questions there. I hope I can focus each of them. Well, yes. So I didn't want to bore you with the chronological details of where I studied and for how long. It's a bit boring, but yes, I was born in Seoul, South Korea, and I came from a musical background. So it was only natural that I started musical training at 4. Of course, I hated practicing here. And then I was educated in the UK and Denmark, and I also briefly spent time in Germany and Italy. Then I returned to the UK, and since 2007, I've been living in Switzerland. Yeah. I think as a child, I was interested in many other subjects, like architecture and psychology. So even in my early 20s, I was thinking about studying and possibly working in other fields, even when I was actually performing, you know what I mean? But my really caring mentors who highly thought of my musicianship dissuaded me. So I lived only as a concert pianist until I turned 40, and that's when I started my neuroscience journey. It's rather late, I think I was probably a determined child, so I wanted to excel at everything I can put my hands on. So because people often ask me, how do you manage both fields, and that is there because looking back, from a mother's perspective, I can't get my head around the fact that I was allowing myself to sleep for 3 or 4 hours as an 11, 12 awards during the exam time because I want to be on top academically, and also because I had to practice, even if I hated it. So, that's why that self-discipline enabled me to do what I did the last few years. So, I didn't have a science background, but I didn't want it to be an excuse. So I didn't want to compromise my standards. So I was working for 16 to 18 hours every day without weekend, no weekend. And then once I found myself working 30 hours straight without a minute sleep after concert. Well, besides music and neuroscience, I designed the house my family lives. And unlike Maria, I'm passionate about cooking, following MasterChef's recipes. So I'll say that I am eager to learn anything I'm interested in, apart from politics and, to be honest with you, physics. So I'm in the right place to be invited. So that's right.
So hold on a moment. To be a professional musician at your level, one requires concentration and, maths and music are so, what can I say? Yeah. So when I hear from what you say, this is just my assumption. So please correct me.
You're forgiven already.
50% wrong. That you said I wasn't a scientist, so I wanted to become one in addition, given that I'm so used to hardworking, I didn't scare away from becoming a scientist. But already what you had, it was of such high level and complex requirements. Why did you also want to become a scientist of something?
You mean neuroscientist?
Yeah.
I can't speak for physics, as I said. I have a really difficult. That's a very good question. I get asked that question all the time. Why I chose the path, But I didn't start off to pursue a scientific career at all. I just had to satisfy my curiosity, because I was, as I said earlier, I was fascinated by psychology. But I realized that it wasn't psychology per se that I was interested, but in the mind and how our mind works. And besides, as a performer, for instance, like peak performance and expertise are what performing artists and sportsmen strive for, So, I tell you what happened, actually. In 2012, I was introduced to the concept of brain plasticity. That is to say that our brain is not a final product. It has the potential to change itself. I until then, like many others, I believe that my brain is what I have, and that there's nothing to do about it. It's a finished product, And also because in classical music, talent is overrated, sadly.
What?
Talent is overrated, sadly, I said.
Talent.
So so there, this was one of the reasons why I was fascinated by how our mind works. So I want to explain to you how what I think of neuroscience. So I think of our brain as a gigantic orchestra. We have 100 billion neurons and glial cells, and they each play an instrument. So anatomically, our brain is divided into 4 mid, hindbrains and the spinal cord. In the orchestra, as some of your musicians know that we have the subsections like strings, wind, brass, and percussion. So to give a superb performance, as it's not enough that you play your part well. Each instrument group has to play, what they agreed on well, but that is not enough. You still have to make sure that each instrument group must play in harmony with other groups. And the interesting thing is that let's say that your brain, the orchestra, had enough individual, sectional, and general rehearsals, but so you can hear that your orchestra sounds a bit more or less accurate. But music is not about playing accurate. Music is about give meaning to each note. You must interpret it. It's like in science, So there comes my conductor, and my conductor is the self-awareness that examines and questions, and we call that metacognition in cognitive neuroscience. So what he does is very similar to the brain. He tries. His role is to realize what he hears in his inner and communicate, what each note means to him. Yeah. So for me, neuroscience is fascinating because it concerns what's uniquely human capabilities, like thinking about feeling, and questioning. So that's why I had to choose science. Neuroscience. It was always I was fascinated by it.
You were not disappointed after you finished your studies, in the sense, why do I ask you this? In the recent months, at least, my perception, we had here academic training, people know, and Mookie has met the lecturer on metacognition and consciousness, Steve Fleming from UCL. So after that was not a machine like parsing of or interpretation of the processes in the mind. But my feeling is that neuroscience today treats the mind as a machine. And you, as a musician, I know you said at the beginning, playing music is not about playing the right notes only. And from this point of view, and this can also come into the discussion with all these people here involved in arts, science, and diversity. How do you also see, or it's conspirationism, that neuroscience treats the mind as a machine? Do you see this as a problem? Do you think people in the field and the other disciplines should take a position about this?
It's a very good question, Maria. Well, to a large extent, monism, which came after Descartes' dualism, is the rationale of neuroscience. So it argued that the brain is the organ of the mind and is the product of neural activity. So our mind is normal. So neuroscience views human behavior as a result of how brain cells talk to each other. So that is facilitated by the electrochemical properties of neurons. And I know that many people have struggled with such a reductionist view. But Maria, I want to invite you to think of this conceptualization from another angle, because I have changed the way I see people. I dare to say that I became more empathetic towards myself and other people, because I see behavior as a result of neurotransmission, a brain functioning. And thanks to neuroscientific knowledge, I was able to forgive people who almost damaged me because their brain functioning, which resulted in their behavior, was influenced by their genetic and environmental attributes. Yeah? So, for instance, instead of saying that that person is awful and evil, I say, oh well, poor thing, their brain is not properly functioning. Or apart from maybe Hitler and Putin. Yeah. So.
Don't know what I would prefer for myself.
Yeah. But it's. I know it's terribly unromantic and soul-killing to describe human behavior as a function of the electrochemistry of neurons, but I believe that it is necessary to narrow down to the most elemental level, so that we can have a kind of comprehensive view of the repertoire of a human behavior. And for instance, why is that we have a problem with the notion that our brain is our behavior is a result of neurotransmission, whereas I don't think many people have a problem seeing the heart as a blood pumping machine, After all, for so many people, the heart is one soul, you know what I mean? And I think it's because we still separate the mind from the body, and then I like to just say that this is my own personal thing, but, I would like to say that, I have become more spiritual, and life has become more mysterious and sublime since I learned how intricately our brain is organized at the molecular and cellular levels. Because life has become a miracle and wonder, But of course, we're not talking about spirituality.
No, here, it is very interesting because first glance, it looks contradictory. If you say the brain is an organ full of processes, like the heart is a blood pumping machine, and we shouldn't shy away from this, then I don't easily find the connection with spirituality, but this is not a problem at all. It is just that because of all these beautiful people and important people and relevant people, I would like to to wrap up from my side, because we want to all discuss here, I have only two last questions. The first is, given this in-depth knowledge now of neuroscience processes in the brain, plus the experience in music, do you see any difference that explains the hundreds of thousands of years of different behavior of women or towards women? This I'm interested from this perspective, the new perspective of studying the brain, which I guess, I trust, I believe, is identical for, no? It's not the
I don't quite follow your question. Are you saying that the female brain is different?
No, I'm saying the female cannot possibly be different, is it? I don't know, but I'm just trying to ask from your expertise in neuroscience and from your human experience from the musical world, how do we explain the different attitudes of society for so many thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years towards women? That was question number one. If you have an opinion, maybe.
Yeah, let's focus on one brain, because otherwise I can't keep up with it, because my brain is a finished product, yeah? Well, that's a very good question. Speaking of gender equality, I would like to kind of share my thoughts. I don't know what you think of my thoughts, but I think it's a high time that we women, thank you for being there, we women examine our own behavior towards each other. I like to say that to you, because how many women have you met in your life who are genuinely supportive and kind to you? You know,
supportive.
Yeah, because well, let's say that you didn't get the job you wanted, and is there a possibility that some women would prefer seeing a man getting that job to a younger woman getting it? And my thesis supervisor told me he was the only male committee member at a conference, and the women talked about how few female keynote speakers there were, but who chose them? Majority was based on competence. You know what I mean? Because I personally feel that I do not want to be selected because of policies or because I'm a woman. I want to be selected because I'm competent. Because I earned it. So I think it's important. I think it's critical that we work with men as a team rather than declaring war against them.
Of course,
to bring a better society for future generations. So that how do you do it? I think it is done by setting clear boundaries and also learning to working on and overcoming our insecurities, and learning to be more generous and kind to each other, to other women. And that way, our sons and daughters will learn how to treat, opposite gender. And also the girls will learn not to be threatened by other girls, but they have that generosity enough to express their appreciation and respect for other girls. You know what I mean?
Of course.
So, I mean, that's just my thought. I don't know what you think about it. I don't know whether I answered your question.
You did, and it is with the possibility of the discussion now in 2 minutes, it will be lovely to hear the other people's opinions. The very last question, I'm very curious. You had mentioned the creation of a musical festival, which will demystify the elitism in classical music, and this is going to be phenomenal to hear a bit more about. So please tell us about this plan.
Thank you. Of course, I'm very happy to talk about my plan. You know what I mean? So this, so I want to create a safe place for everybody from all walks of life. So that we can share and celebrate the beauty of music, knowledge of neuroscience and healing. So it's a festival of music and neuroscience. I'm bothered by the fact that the music is taken down from compulsory education, even in Germany. But frankly, how do we learn about great arts then, if education isn't there? So the result is that how many young people do you see in classical concerts? And another worry of mine, so my motto is basically education, education, education. So I want to provide an opportunity for children to be exposed to classical music. And another concern I have in current epoch of classical world is that I worry that where it's going. It may sound very harsh, but to a certain extent, classical music has become a visual entertainment. I know it sounds very harsh, but so I neither want children to be put off by the stiffness around the classical music milieu, nor do they get the impression that classical music is about singing, not listening to attractive young people come and go, because the music is about being in touch with ourselves, in the universe and the life force. That's how I see it. So in my festival is focused on families and children. And so children can move a bit and make a small sound, and they can ask all kinds of questions to musicians afterwards, And so this is the first part of the festival. And second part is the neuroscience part. That is to say that I do think that we have a critical need for better communication between academia and the general public. I don't think many scientists prioritize the dissemination over the production of their findings. So I think that's why we have so many neuromyths in media. So for instance, you hear about the Mozart effect. If you hear the sonata by Mozart, for two pianos, and then your brain will be like, woo, it's going to work really well, kind of thing. Or there's also the male brain, and also you hear about how to optimize your brain because you only use 10% of your brain. It's just ridiculous. You know what I mean? So what I find is that scientific information is rarely transplanted into the public domain is because the general public is heterogeneous, and there is a wealth of diversity in educational backgrounds, cultures, and personal beliefs. So I think what happens is that the final message of neuroscientific findings tends to have different meanings according to the reader's background, like in the news, for instance, And I think that's why it's important that we have direct communication. So the scientists communicate directly to the public by reformulating their contents in a language that people can understand. And the people are so curious about the brain all the time these days. There are so many newspapers talk about all these things. So in my festival, there will be lectures about the brain. Not lecture sounds boring, but actually interesting talks by brilliant neuroscientists who can talk in their language. So people can understand and they enjoy the lectures, the contents, And the third part is that I met many musical neuroscientists, and so I want to provide them a private setting for their so that they can share their love of music together. But private setting because I don't want them to freak out by the notion of performing, So I'll be a kind of a faithful accompanist, And that the final aim of my festival is I want to house my friend's foundation. It's called Innocence in Danger. My friend Homera Zera, she's been working she established this foundation about more than 20 years ago. The foundation protects and supports sexually abused children. And she told me how music had a significant impact on these people. When I think about them, they have lost faith in adults who were supposed to care for them, who were supposed to protect them, and they feel their bodies are not their own. And I do feel that they were subject to one of the worst forms of human ugliness. So I'm hoping that music can alleviate their suffering a bit, if not in all of them. So as you can hear, it's a kind of cauldron of many ideas, but there are very there is a very clear theme here, that's sharing and healing. By the way, my friend, who is a great conductor called Gabo Takashinagi, said music is spiritual medicine. For me, neuroscience is educational medicine, because as I told you, the knowledge about human behavior kind of helped me kind of forgive people, as I said, so yeah.
Wonderful.
I know it's like,
you cannot sleep more than 3 hours per night. I mean, excuse me. Festival with these 4 branches and the foundation. Okay, so now let's open the floor. There's also something in the chat. I have to take back my laptop. But it's only Noor who says that we can hear you. Yeah, and Evangelia. So please let us start the discussion. Who would like to say something? Here. Laure.
Yes, if it's okay with you, I have a question. Thank you very much, Mookie. It's really interesting. Sorry. I like you saying that you have become more spiritual, and I can relate to that as when you discover and learn about the complexity of the human body, the human mind. There's a feeling of awe, which can bring people to spirituality. I have 2 questions. The first one is, has your knowledge that you have gained on neuroscience and your expertise, has it had an impact on the way you interpret music? Has it changed your way of playing, of interpreting music? And have you extended your curiosity about neuroscience to the stomach and guts? Because we hear these days that we have a second brain.
Well, very good question, actually. Thank you. Yes, it definitely has changed the way I play the instrument and the way I interpret music. Yeah, definitely. Just to give you a background about musicians, and I have to explain this because otherwise it might not make sense to you. Many musicians say they play what they feel. So inverted commas, like intuitively, and that's not an interpretation. As I said before, you have to give meaning to every note. And how do you do it? You have to equip yourself with knowledge, depth of knowledge in harmony, counterpoint, and structure. And I think at the elite level, people think more about music. I think they, than actual physical practice. And I think interpretation is not a final product either. You have to revisit the work with fresh eyes and curiosity, as if you never worked on it before. You know what I mean? So that's why we have 2 very different interpretations of Bach's Goldberg Variations by Glenn Gould. And so how it changed me is that now I can make a distinction amongst musicians. One is that the instrumentalist, musicians and artists. So on instrumentalist, I define him or her as simply someone who performs. So so people get impressed by the physicality of the performance. The next level is musicians, and the musicians, I think you rarely meet them, but it's a wonder when it happens. They are thinkers. Their focus is on how to serve music rather than on themselves. You know what I mean? The next level is the artists, and they have this magical combination of great artistry, musicianship, technical facility and intelligence. But there's more. Plus, their interpretation can transport to another universe, beyond this kind of immediate physical world. So the neuroscience knowledge actually helped me in 2 ways. One is that, as I mentioned earlier, I became more spiritual. That means that there is depth of appreciation and how can I put it, the way I feel about music, because life became more wondrous, you know what I mean? And also I know that in the past, you know, if there are many difficult passages, I used to say, oh God, you know, how am I gonna do this, you know? So I would think about fingering, changing fingers and blah, blah, blah. But now I think there are always solutions. And it's a matter of finding solutions rather than saying it's very difficult passage, you know what I mean? So yeah, so that's how. And then also thirdly, I must say, I became much more competent as a magician, funnily enough, really interesting, yeah. And then, sorry, I couldn't remember the topic. I was
brain.
Well,
Second brain.
it's you know, it's a hot topic in neuroscience now. Yeah, because there are many groups who are working on it. I was interested in it, but I haven't really delved into it. But it's just to give you background. You know, we didn't know until recently 90% of serotonin is in our gut, stomach.
90% of what?
Serotonin is a neurotransmitter.
Serotonin is coming. Oh.
Yeah, it's a neurotransmitter. So there is a direct communication between how we feel and how we you know, and think with what we eat, you know. I wouldn't be the right person to give you the right answers because it wasn't my domain. So yeah, so you know, there are many books I can recommend you. So, yeah.
Okay.
Louisa?
Thank you. Thank you, Mookie. I don't know where to begin. This marriage that you're bringing to the table of your neuroscience and musicianship, and I've listened to the clips on your page, bravo, and to your music clips on your website to hear this phenomenal way in which you perform. And I wanted to put to you the only clever question I could think about that might marry your two disciplines that made me curious when you spoke. There's a German author whom you may know called Caroline Emke. And she wrote a paragraph in a book that really spoke to me as someone who was also trained in classical music, and then through my diversity and inclusion work have become like you, but not anywhere near that level, very interested in how the brain operates, particularly in the neurodiversity field. And this paragraph she wrote in another book said that when we have conversations with others, it's like you're listening to an orchestra. Your ear may listen only to the strings, but if you listen harder to what the person is saying, like the spaces between the words or the inflections of tone or what words are not said, it's like listening deeper into the orchestra and picking up the oboe or just picking up the timpani in the background. And I found it just a beautiful way of listening more deeply, let's say, to others by imagining that the voice is more than just the strings, which, to all good respect, strings is an important element. but I always find what my ear does always listen to the oboe in a symphony. I find it's just the one instrument that stands out for me.
Kind of remotely.
Yeah, and I just wonder if you could speak to this idea that that she perhaps she took this idea from a music teacher of hers as a child who once encouraged her to listen like this. Yeah. And I wonder if you could speak to this idea that our way of communicating to each other is not just the solo first violinist, but it's a symphony behind.
I find it extremely beautiful, I must say. And I think probably, I don't know the writer, but probably I think it concerns empathy, I think. So you are taking the person as a whole. It's not just what they say. But as you said, there is a space between words and there's body language. There is an aura you feel about that person, you know, and you have to take that person as a whole. And going back to the neurodiversity, I personally have had to deal with it in my family. Interestingly, I met a brilliant psychiatrist. Normally I'm like this to psychiatry, but he was such an inspiring lecturer. And he said to me, you know what, it's better not to diagnose people, but see the, you know, kind of phenotypes and their behavior as their personality. And I think there is some truth in it. Rather than labeling people, by coming at embrace one to another as a whole, And I often say to my child and my daughter that if your friend expects you to change, then that's not a friend. Make sure that that person is a friend, meaning that that person embraces you as a whole, no matter what you look like, what you're good at, or where you live, doesn't matter. And I think we really need, I feel strongly about the learning of empathy more and more as I get older. Yeah. So,
Thank you.
I hope I answered you.
Very much so. I think you pinned it by describing it as an empathetic way of being with others. And what I know we discover in our diversity and inclusion work is the people around the table who are in the same interest level as well too, is that we've been brought up in a world that requires us to conform and to be one type and not to appreciate and embrace the differences between the people, but rather trying to find a common approach. And this I find pervades all our large organization processes. What's the one process we can make that people need to fit into in order to be like everybody else? And that's a pity, because I think the approach you're describing is much more human. And
well, why do you want to be the same as other people? Mm-hmm. You are individual. You can't fit. We humans cannot be fitted into just like one box. You know what I mean? We're all different. We all have different genetic and makeups, and we have different life experiences. And I think it's terribly crude and unintelligent way of categorizing us, we humans. So I'm very against that. So yeah.
All the points you said, I'm very fascinated to be here. My question is, I don't know how will it sound like, but I mean, with respect to music, a large content we consume from all the social media, like it's very short clip, like you've heard of the apps, Instagram and TikTok, and they are very short clips with various kind of music that really shuffles a lot. So what do you think? What kind of impact does it have on the brain? I'm just curious to know, because. From what I understand, music very well relate to the kind of activity that happens in your brain. So if you listen to very optimistic music 1 second for 30 seconds, and then for another 30 seconds you're listening to a low vibe music, and then it keeps oscillating like that. What kind of behavior? I mean, does it how could it affect your brain? I'm just curious if you have any insights.
I think it's just a broad question. It's a very good question. I really love that. I probably will need another 30 years to work on your question, I think. I think that the effect of the social media is the general effect is the short attention span. It's a critical issue here in every field, for the next generation. I tell you just background of this, in classical music, it didn't matter until the turn of the century. If you're an artist, that was what mattered, not appearance of gender. But now it's a different story altogether. So you are talking about the short clips and fast changes. Even in classical music, it's a very serious problem. That's why I said that. To an extent, it has become a visual entertainment. So what do you need? Well, you as long as you have technical command and you are lucky enough to be attractive and young, and you are happy to, let's say, spend considerable effort and time on social media and PR, then you're set. But is this art? I want to ask you that question. Is this art? It's a consumerism, in my opinion. Where is depth? Where is it in touch with ourselves?
Where are the layers?
Yeah, and about, I wouldn't know the brain, what happens with it, different music or sad music or that. But don't forget that life is not about this or that, happiness or sadness. It's part of us. It's part of our life. We are not meant to have a life that is just to be good. And pain is there to teach us, to remind us to grow and remember the happy moments as well. And so for me, even sad music is good for you as long as it's good music, and of course happy music is great too, but so
how does this high-low, like it's a very quick transition, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds. It's just depending on how long people scroll, because it's a activity that a lot of people do unconsciously. They open it and they kind of do it. So probably I was just curious that like does it impact the creative aspects of the brain, or like which part of the brain activates, or what activity do you observe there?
Actually, I haven't done that research. I don't know whether anybody did it actually. It's because the science of music cognition perception is a baby as well, even more baby than neuroscience itself. So my studies were based on molecular and cellular neuroscience at King's College London, but my thesis was about musical imagery, and but I don't know what happens in the brain. I'm sure that it needs, as I said, about 30 years of research on it.
Because could that be a possible reason of addiction or something like that? I'm not sure.
I think addiction comes from something else. I think it's scrolling is addiction, not the music.
High lows.
Yeah, it's constant stimulation. It's people can't sit still. People cannot just like feel and be present, and I think meditation would be good for everybody. So, yeah.
Also, I'm stretching it a bit, but I want to really know that the point you said when ma'am asked you the question that 90% of the serotonin come from the
got to.
Can you really talk about it for some more time? I would love to hear it.
Well, I have to actually probably should be involved in the research to really give you right answers, because I do not want to do, I don't want to do things that I am not entitled to do, because I'm really like, I'm a perfectionist. I know it's useless, but I want to know before I can talk to you about that. But it is fascinating. So I do like make sure that my daughter, for instance, eats right food just before exams, yeah. So, but I sent a few, recommendations of a few books to Marianne, and maybe you can distribute. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So eat well, exercise.
I will try.
Yeah.
There's a question on the chat. If you could tell us a bit more about your research. You mentioned music imagery.
So, Mookie, there is a last question on Zoom there. Yeah. If you wanted to say your thesis subject, you said it was music imagery, but the person says, is this correctly heard?
Yes, it is correct, yeah. So my thesis was about basically musical imagery, because I emphasize the importance of visualization and then what you can hear in your head. As I said before, at the elite level, you need to think more about music than, let's say, doing the physical practice. So many times I was advised from my mentors to think more about music, hear it in your head, rather than just practice, mindlessly, until you are drop dead, So the musical imagery, basically, there's huge correlation between musical imagery and music perception. Is very similar. Of course, there's a slight difference, of course, but the strength of the brain activation is, of course, lower in musical imagery because it's an actual perception of what's happening in all the sensory information coming into you. So what my basically thesis was about how whether there's a difference between the elite musicians and postgraduate level pianists when they actually listen to music in their heads, whether there is a difference between these two groups, and whether the complexity of music can influence that as well. So it was about using the pupil size, because we can measure to a certain extent the effort we make. Kahneman says mental effort. It's not quite correct to say this, but So we are measuring how much effort we make by the size of the pupils. And then how, so let's say that if you made a lot of effort, does that mean that, somehow it translates into better performance? So sorry, I didn't make it clearly. So if you make more effort during audiation, that is reading scores hearing music in your head while you're reading a score, that's called audiation. So let's say if you made a lot of effort during score reading, will that translate into a better performance? So I didn't want to use anything subjective because I'm a musician. I can't stand people saying, is it better or not? So I said just accuracy in pitch and rhythm. So yeah, that was about it. Because I quite frankly, the many papers I couldn't take seriously because of the ecological validity. I'm a musician, so I'm coming from that angle as well. When I read papers, it's not just that angle. So I said, no, it has to be in the middle. So yeah.
So was there a difference between elite musicians and students?
Well, I'm hoping to do the research. It hasn't been done yet, yeah. But yeah, so it hasn't been. Yeah, this research question is a gap in the field. So yeah.
There should be some kind of difference in this audiation process, in the sense that elite musicians can hear the music in the brain faster. No?
I wouldn't say necessarily faster.
No.
Not
not faster, played faster, but more easily see the whole score, let's say, performed in the brain than somebody who is not at that level.
Depends.
Okay.
I think it depends on whether you practice on a regular basis, I think. Like anything else.
Anything else.
Yeah.
So what do we do now? It's 1:00-ish.
I have one more, last one. So first of all, some statistics on the elite pianists that I have no idea. What is the, how many females and how many males would you say are there?
In classical music?
Yes.
Well, it's a very good question, actually. I wouldn't say the classical music is more gender balanced, So, as I said, women, probably soloists had a better time being a woman than orchestra players. So, as I said, it didn't matter in the past whether your appearance was like this or that. Like, if your body, it didn't matter whether your body was as frail and almost hunchbacked as Clara Haskell, or whether you could trump any man, like a Dame Mira Hess. It's an interesting question because in 2014, they discovered that in America, they had 63% men and 37% women on average. But there is a very interesting study that came out in 2019, which was, sorry, I'm talking fast because I'm worried about the time. It was published in Frontier in Psychology, which is a very reputable publication. The researchers found that now we have slightly more women in 40 reputable UK, European, and North American orchestras in the first, second violin, and flute sections. So it is very encouraging. It's improving, but the leader of each instrument group was 83% men. I think the most arduous professions in classical music for women are probably conductor and composer. So, but there is a figure that we now have 8% of conductors are women in the top 100 orchestras in the world, compared to only 1% in 2013, for instance. But also for composers, for instance, now I think it was 24% of contemporary composers whose works were most performed were women, compared to half of that figure in, I think it was 2017. So it is improving slightly, So yeah.
But in Vienna, apparently.
Oh yes, I was gonna say that. In Vienna, there's So in Vienna, the very conservative Vienna Philharmonic, do you know when they accepted a woman? When they accepted a woman in 1997, and guess what she played?
Harp.
Sorry. You know why? Harp. 88% of harpists are men. And then Berlin Philharmonic, for instance, it was only 1982 that they allowed a woman to come and audition and granted a job.
In Vienna, the flutist Silvia Karendu got the place, and already the same day in the corridor, they were telling her, "You will not last long." And the next year she was out.
I'm not surprised. It's a horrible.
I don't know, because
That's why I said, women have better time being, soloist somehow, because it's so horrible, But as I said, it's improving. I like to focus on, also the progress as well. But as you said, it's
some exception.
Yeah, it's we have a long way to go in both fields,
And then you also mentioned like a very last point that I really resonated with me, that talent is overrated in your field. I guess it applies to many other fields, but what do you think needs to be more highly estimated in place of talent?
Some psychologists or cognitive neuroscience will refute what I was saying. It's just my personal opinion, because I had to find my ways to find efficient practice, because, I was one of those young pianists who used to practice mindlessly over again, like many others. It's probably intelligent thinking. So talent is extremely overrated, in my opinion. And, one made great performance, or performances of Mozart, it was very clear. From the early age on, it's very clear practice. And with the aim, you work on that. And then once you got it, you work on that. It's not like work on everything, but it's got a precise focus. And that's what I do when I do these practices. It's called deliberate practice. And there's a book, maybe you find it interesting, it's called The Peak by Erickson. He's the kind of a pioneer and the kind of expert in the area of deliberate practice and, how to and expertise, So, yeah.
Fantastic. So would any of you join us quickly to have a quick lunch or grab a sandwich, depending on the length of the queues here next door? That's why we came to this room. Or maybe people who are remotely connected and their offices are not very far from here. We just, no?
Does it need to be quick?
They go to Alice. What time do you have to leave this place?
Around 2.
So we have an hour.
Yeah.
They go to Alice.